Welcome to Hope is Here. My name is Greg Horn, and today is the day of the NCAA championship. And obviously, us Kentucky fans were hoping our Wildcats would be playing, but unfortunately, they are not. But I do want to talk about a Wildcat championship team that did win the NCAA tournament, cut down the nets back in 1978. We celebrated the 40th anniversary of that this year. They recognized this team at Rupp Arena back in late February, and there's a great book that's just come out called 40 Minutes to Glory. It's an inside the Kentucky Wildcats 1978 championship season by Doug Brunk. And just a really good book. Just came out in February when they recognized the team, but I was fortunate enough to get a copy and have read it and just really, really enjoyed it because I actually do remember this team. I was 12 years old at the time, and it was the first team that I remember winning like that, a championship. It actually went down to Memorial Coliseum where they brought the team back for a celebration, and just a really special memory in my young life and my first NCAA championship with the Kentucky Wildcats. But today we're going to talk about faith and that was involved on that team, and one of the interesting aspects that's in this book, and while we're talking about it on Hope is Here, because I think there's a lot of tie-in with what we can learn from sports and growing spiritually and having hope in our everyday life. And joining us is Dr. David Blondell. He is a retired minister of the Christian Church, the Disciples of Christ. He began as a student pastor, and then he went into full-time ministry. He had pastorates in Virginia, Alabama, but principally was in Kentucky. And when he was with the UK team and kind of the chaplain of that team, he was actually the senior minister of Crestwood Christian Church, where he served for 26 years. He and his wife Julia have lived in Lexington, Kentucky for nearly 50 years. And so Reverend Blondell's joined us today. And, you know, Reverend Blondell, you're mentioned in this book, I believe, 3 different times. But before we get talking about that, I got to get your thoughts on Sister Jean. What do you think about Sister Jean in this this NCAA tournament? She's getting a lot of attention and seems to be bringing that Loyola team a lot of good luck.
Yes, Greg, I would agree with you. She is getting a lot of attention. I think that she's a very unique character. And I probably should say character with either italics or quotation marks, because she seems to enjoy, obviously, what she's doing well beyond her years of active service as a nun, and she has quite a following of people who have just now learned about her, as have I, and but then she is also revered by the current players, and I presume even previous teams, but she's very, very much revered.
Yeah, it's really been an interesting aspect of that team as they've made this just Cinderella run all the way to the Final Four. And I think the more amazing part to me out of all of it, that the last time that they actually were in the Final Four was in 1963 when they won the national championship, and she was actually with that team there. So she's got quite a run with this team.
Well, she and I have something more in common than I had thought, and that continuous relationship with various teams. My association with the UK players spanned Joe Hall's time of coaching, and I think we're going to get into something like that in a few minutes. But yes, over the years, she's had quite an influence, I'm sure, on lots of players.
Well, that's a great lead in to our topic today about that 78 championship team. But before that, were you also involved with doing some pregame devotions and things for the team before the 78 season?
Oh, yes. Probably during Coach Hall's first year, and this will lead me into indicating how this happened to come about as to my chaplain role, if you can call it that. Obviously, it was nothing official. The university does not have such a position on their staff or anything of that nature. But I began attending a booster club. It was called the Wildcat Club. And the first meeting that I attended, well, one of the first, I should say, was at the Holiday Inn over on New Circle Road near the Winchester Road Exchange. It was New Circle. And we later moved to the Campbell House and met there for a number of years. I don't know that the Wildcat Club is in existence these days. My goodness, it may even be against the NCAA rules. I don't know. But the thing that I remember, it did have to do with the NCAA rules. Coach Hall addressed the club that night, and he was telling about, it was during the time that he was recruiting a young man from Indiana, not Kyle Macy, that was later, but he was recruiting Kent Benson. You remember that name, that player?
Yes, sir.
He was a big player, a good player, and so Joe made remarks to the membership of the Wildcat Club. We would really like to have this young man, and in your business travels, if you have any opportunity to stop by and see him or speak to him or call him or something, why, I would really appreciate that. Well, as you can understand, having made that statement, that's no longer allowed by the NCAA, just to have any fan to try to recruit or to talk to a recruit, because it would be considered an official visit. And so now there are only a limited number of visits that a coaching staff can make to a recruit. Nonetheless, that's what he said. Well, I went home that night and began thinking, I don't travel like these other members of the club, and I won't be going in that area. And he was talking about how much that would help his program. Well, I wondered, can I help his program? Is there anything that I could do? So within a day or two, I went to Coach Hall's office, and he and his family were parishioners of mine. They were members of Crestwood Church, and he still is. And he has children here. Two of his three children are members of the church. And one, his daughter, holds the role of an elder in the church, very, very active. In any event, I went to him, and in his office we talked about this, and I said, Joe, what can I do? Is there any way? And I reminded him of his comment to the members of the Wildcat Club, and I said, I don't do that, and I don't have any opportunity that way. What do you think? Is there any way? Well, I don't remember. We probably bounced around a couple of ideas. In any event, whether he suggested or I did, I think maybe he did, that I come and speak to the members of the team. I said, well, fine. Well, the first time I did that, probably within a few days or a week from that conversation, I went to his office, and the team gathered in his office. It was in the afternoon, probably before their practice time, and I gave my first devotion to them then. The content, I have no recollection, but from there, though, I began, I think that he said, well, why don't you come to the next home game, and we eat at such and such a time before the game, and you could speak to the members then, to the team then. So I did, and I began. That was the time. It was early in Joe's career. As I say, I don't recall if it was his first or second year of coaching, but that would have put that somewhere in the early to mid-'70s. So I was friends with and acquainted. I have long-lasting friendships to this day with members of his early teams as well as the later teams, and those relationships have meant a great deal to me, and I trust and I hope to the players as well.
Well, that's one of the things as I read this book, 40 Minutes to Glory, about the 1978 Wildcat Championship team, that obviously Coach Hall was a disciplinarian. And yet, he wanted the guys obviously to be tough mentally and physically. But as I know that you agree with me, there's a God-sized shaped hole in all of us that only he could fill. And so Coach Hall, obviously, by what you're sharing and from reading in this book, also cared about the spiritual side of his players.
Yes. Well, I recall a number of times, I say a number, maybe a half a dozen times through the years, not with just one team, but Joe would bring them to Sunday morning worship at Crestwood. And, of course, it may have been their intent to sit near the back row or on the back row, but it also allowed members of the congregation to see what was ahead of them because the team members were in the back. And if they'd had to sit behind and look around and stand up look over them, it would have been quite a task. So yes, they would come at times, and Coach Hall would bring them. But again, there was no requirement. He just, I think, would make an invitation, and who wanted to do it. I don't know that the whole team did every time, but that's my recollection. That yes, they came as a team, and we did other things that if you want to talk about, well, I can do that.
Absolutely. Well, if you just tuned in, we're talking with Reverend David Blondell. He was the unofficial chaplain for the University of Kentucky men's basketball team back when Joe B. Hall was the head coach. And we're going to be talking tomorrow about a specific devotion that he gave in the book called 40 Minutes to Glory inside the Kentucky Wildcats 1978 championship season. But what were some of the topics that you touched on in these devotions, these pregame devotions, Reverend Blondell?
Well, I always used the scripture, and they were my devotions were scripture-based. I would obviously, as any minister or preacher does for his regular congregation, and I kind of considered the basketball players as part of my extended or expanded congregation. But I would use different texts to start with a thought, but then to try to relate thoughts and ideas and matters of faith to them. I never asked as to what their faith was, whether Protestant or Catholic or what denomination. That didn't make any difference. That's not why I was there. But I would use that, and any preaching minister does that. He or she relates to the congregation on that kind of a basis. But I always talked about sportsmanship and personal responsibility and having a faith and a concept of something higher and greater than themselves.
Well, I love that you did that, and I was reading that in the book of 40 Minutes to Glory. It's inside the Kentucky Wildcats 1978 championship season. We're talking here on the Monday of the NCAA championship. I'm Greg Horn with the Reverend David Blondell. Stay with us tomorrow because we're going to talk about he was actually not planning to go to the championship game in St. Louis, but we're going to talk about that and more tomorrow on Hope is Here. Let's be honest. Medicare can be really confusing. Scott County resident Jason Biddle has over 17 years helping seniors and retirees with issues surrounding Medicare, health care, and Social Security. Don't give yourself a headache. Contact Jason Biddle today with any insurance questions you have related to Medicare, health care, and Social Security. Contact Jason today for help at 502-395-1603. That's 502-395-1603.
CMI is your full-service human resources provider in Central Kentucky. For 15 years, CMI Human Resources has taken great pride in helping organizations and people work. Whether it's employee handbooks or help in filling a position, no job is too large or too small for CMI. Contact the professionals today at CMI Human Resources, 859-296-2800, or online at cmiconsulting.com.